Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pop Marketing Podcast. I am still your host, Joe Cox, the Pop Marketer, and do we have, I rarely get to have a guest on that is a completely another pop marketer themselves, and somebody who has been in the industry and doing pop culture and marketing and mixing those two together, and running your own consulting agency for like 18 years. So Jenny Stiven, welcome to the Pop Marketing Podcast.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. Same back at you. We are a bit of a unicorn breed out here.
Well, hey, listen, we had a chat like always before we jumped on and started recording, and I can already tell we need to we'll have part 2 and 3. Yeah. Sure. Some therapy sessions. It'd be great. Yes. So I always start out with origin stories because that's, a lot of people and a lot of marketers that are listening, maybe early in their career, maybe thinking about switching inside of their careers. Now's a good time for that. Right. So tell us your origin story. How did you go from being just somebody who loves popular culture and somebody that loves geek culture, and then mix that into the world of marketing? And tell us a story.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for having me. It is a bit of a normal production entertainment story in the sense that nobody in my family was in entertainment, and I wanted to be in entertainment and production since I was probably 8 or 9 years old. So it was something that I was pretty focused on, if you can be focused at that age, but I didn't know what I wanted to do. And so what I started in was television production. And that's where I stumbled because, hey, I'm older Gen X. And so I stumbled into digital very early on, working in a post-production house as one of my first jobs. So it was that marriage of being curious, which I cannot emphasize enough. It's always the drum that I beat to anybody that I'm talking to, because I go to seminars and I talk to students about how to get into what I do. And it's marrying what you love and being curious. So being a geek, being since forever into comics and sci-fi and fantasy and reading and movies, and then discovering and falling into digital, it probably wouldn't ever have occurred to me to marry those two, except for the fact that I just kept asking questions. So at my post-production house, learned about digital. And this is super early. This is 1989 into 92. And at that point, we started a company, and we started literally an online production company in 92, which was at that time pretty much text. So it was Usenet groups. And that's where I really fell into myself, because I was interested, X-Files, Buffy, Aliens, Star Wars, Usenet groups. So that's where it started. And then it just progressed where I realized this is what I love to do. And I ended up going to agencies and studios, both. Again, I've never been a career girl at one particular company. That was just not my style either. And you have to be very aware of what your personality is. Can you be a consultant? It's not easy, as we chatted about briefly. And I just followed my heart and my passion. So there were some bad jobs with that, but I learned at every one. And so I went to agencies, worked on productions, became a full-time consultant in 2004 because I realized I wanted to be able to do multiple projects. Didn't want to do a deep dive only on one for a whole year. And ended up working.
This was that's pre-social media. That's pre-social.
It is. So we were doing, it was for the most part, it was forums, chat groups, MySpace. It was doing a lot of site work and doing a lot of connecting the dots between your offline and your online fandoms. We weren't really calling them digital fandoms at the time. So I just would follow each one of these. When I ended up having a I guess you call it a full-time consultancy at Fox, is when I was really able to start to solidify what I want to do. And that was, I started at Fox in 2004, had a bunch of other projects as well, but they kept asking me because nobody wanted the sci-fi fantasy projects. Nobody. So we would have, and by the way, our digital marketing team was 2 people. So, again, nobody was really spending money or paying attention to it. So not only was it, oh, Jenny will do it for digital marketing because I loved it, but it was, oh, has anybody been talking to the production department? And I would just ask that. Well, why would we? Why do you need that? Because it'd be really cool to have content. Can we create content? So I got to do all those things because we were the only people there. And nobody wanted, I don't know why anybody would turn Star Wars down, but nobody wanted Star Wars or Aliens or Predators or any of the TV shows. So I got Buffy, I got X-Files, I got everything. And nobody wanted them. So again, it was just me asking. It's the drum I beat. Be curious and ask. I got them because it just occurred to me, hey, well, who's working on Star Wars? Well, nobody. Oh my God, are you kidding? I'll take it right now. Let me go do everything. And then I was able to develop that with a bunch of friends. We all worked together. It was a really amazing team. And then we just started pulling in more studios like MGM, and I worked with Sony and Universal. And in 2015, what I realized is that what I was doing as a producer, so I was producing content, I was producing marketing, and I was producing online and offline. So I was producing events at cons. What I was doing was fandom development. And a couple of friends of mine, so Chris Longfield over at Fanthropology and Meredith Levine, a couple of us realized that this was actually a market. So audience development and research was a bit of a forgotten department at most studios. They were relied on for focus groups, test groups, things like that. But in terms of active or proactive sustainability with an audience where you develop a relationship, that became customer relation management, CRM, but that was an automation. How can we automate this? We send out newsletters. There was no relationship building. And I left in 2015 realizing that's what I wanted to focus on. I wanted to bridge fandoms to their IPs and go to the IPs and say, you need to develop and sustain this fandom. You cannot have, for people out there that are in production, they know it, you can't just have a campaign window and drop off a cliff. You need to maintain that relationship and spend time. So that's what I do. In a nutshell.
It's so many things that I have questions on, or it might be comments. It's that I always find this, and in a lot of the things that I dig into, I research, or a lot of the stories in popular culture, they always start in the places, like big places where nobody's watching.
Right.
And they never have any money. They never have any money, and they figure it out, right? Like that's where Adult Swim comes from. Like it's like, hey, I have a bunch of old cartoons and nobody cares, that nobody wants to watch. We have 24 hours of cartoon, a channel that I've made. Nobody's going to buy the after 9 o'clock spots. So sure, you can
like
make Space Ghost.
The producers would always tell me, sorry about the dog in the background. The producers would always tell me, you have $1.99 and a cup of coffee to work with early on. I mean, obviously, some of that changed with the first Spider-Man being one of the biggest campaigns when Sony did that. There's an argument amongst us in the digital marketing, digital content group, whether 1997 Stargate or Star Trek movie was the first one that actually did a site. But what we always laugh about is it went from, we have nothing, oh, wait, here's $500,000, here's $2 million, back to $1.99 and a cup of coffee. And it goes in cycles. And in those cycles, to your point, it's about, be curious. Where are those areas, those gaps that a need that's not being taken care of? You don't create one, but if there's somebody that isn't being taken care of, or some project or some idea, or if you're at a company and something isn't being covered, there's a gap, offer, be curious, ask why. They may have money for it. You never know. Eventually, I got money, and I got good money to do it. But sometimes you have to do the elbow grease and
Oh yes.
the
You
sweat
got to pay
equity.
your dues. Yeah, yeah. But
I
I'll tell you
disagree.
this too: it's that the $1.99 and a cup of coffee is. It may be difficult, but there's no better training ground in the world for to train your brain on ideas, on
Yes.
like coming up of saying, okay, I don't
Mm-hmm.
have anything. What can I do? How do I
Right.
do this? And like how I know, but I do know what I do have is like
Right.
a ton of people that are freaking nuts about this
Yes.
IP, and a whole army of people that are. And I'll say too, you had mentioned earlier too, I had I had kind of made the mistake. I was like, hey, this is pre-social media. Hell no, that's not pre-social media. And you had kind of said, yeah, kind of. No, the fandoms were going on. Social media
Long
was going
before.
long
Right.
before, and so
And it's,
very few people remember the chats and
oh,
like
right. AOL chat
that's where it
rooms.
happened.
I mean, it was all,
That's where it
and
happened. And
Usenet
they're
group.
in and Usenet groups, and they were active,
No, God,
right? And nobody's watching them, or
no.
like especially at the
No,
time. It's not like
no one at the studios or the IP owners were paying attention. It's one of the things that a bunch of us talk about all the time. Like I said, was it Stargate? Was it Star Trek? One of the other things that we always dive into is the origin of the quote unquote 20th, 21st century fandom. Of course, sports and music. That's a given. But when it comes to pop culture, and there's been a couple of books written recently that are fascinating, tracing from sports to collectibles to pop culture. But you literally can go back to radio shows. You can go back to, obviously, books. Sherlock Holmes had a huge fandom. Charles Dickens had a huge fandom. And so we talk about this, about how that history and progression of fandom and how has it changed, and now it's a business. It's always been a business as an audience development. You want to reach the audience, you want to sell books, sell papers, sell a radio show, advertising, TV, film, put butts in seats. What's different now that I love is that it's not just about that IP, that story that they love. It's so much deeper than that. So it isn't just about purchase power for fandoms and what IPs or studios are looking for. It's about, again, the relationship. So, what kind of content, what kind of community management are you going to spend? What kind of time are you going to spend with your fandom? And that's become the commodity.
let's talk about fandoms because let's talk about fandoms. A, that's your focus.
Mm-hmm.
And B, I have so many questions, it's beginning funny. So
I love
when it
it.
comes to the world of fandoms,
Mm-hmm.
when do you think that it took place? When do you remember it taking place where it became this back and forth? What a 10 years or 20 years. It's been so strange to go from the
I
place
know.
where, like, as a fan in a fandom, there's not even a faintest glimpse. Right now, I always say, I'm like, I don't complain about any comic book movie coming out,
No.
because in my time, I just dreamt that it would happen. So
Right?
when I see anything going on, especially when
Yeah.
it's the weird stuff, I'm like, I'm just happy. I have nothing
You
bad
know
to say.
me.
Because it was made, somebody spent millions of
Right.
dollars to bring
Right.
this thing that I thought reading like Wizard magazine would
Right.
never
Yes.
happen in a billion years. And they used to
No.
say like we would play the X-Men, and I'm like,
Right.
oh,
Right.
if that
Or Spider-Man. I
ever
was
would
more
happen.
Flash, or because I was really into Flash, Green Lantern, and Spider-Man. So, and obviously Wonder Woman. I was always thinking, because in my time I was watching Linda Carter play Wonder Woman, and so you were
Oh
always
yeah.
thinking, who's going to do, what's going to happen next? And then we had Battlestar Galactica, not the new version, the old
Yep.
version, the
Yep.
70s version. So, and you had Saturday morning cartoons that were hilarious looking back on, but at least we had something. And then you had collectibles. And I would say that the current version, so not talking about the 50s, 60s, 70s, and 80s, because that was really TV, that was comic books, that was collectibles. There were some movies, obviously.
Toys, making,
Well, and
toy.
Superman, Christopher Reeve as Superman. So you definitely had a shift that started to happen. However, from my point of view, from where I was working in entertainment production, it was still an outlier. So any geek, sci-fi, fantasy, comic book, anything in the geek universe, or what we define now as geek universe, was an outlier. So Superman was cool. It was amazing that happened. But, Richard Donner, those guys, they're geeks. That's not the norm. So you would see the Saturday morning cartoons, and what would happen to a lot of studio execs when they're looking at it, it's not an IP they would bother to look at for anything beyond the Saturday morning cartoons. It was kiddie, quote unquote, kiddie content. Yep. So it's really, I got to give Fox credit, because it's, to my mind, it's two things. It's Star Trek and it's X-Files. And there are others that are as important. Star Wars is a given, but again, it was considered an outlier. It was considered, I would have conversations super early on in my career in the 90s, because I was doing video games as well. I worked on a lot of video game sites and forums, because that was an easy fandom, right? That was ready-made.
That's another one that has turned into some of the deepest and real fandoms and real communities, and real communities too.
Exactly.
And every time I talk to brands who say that they want a community, I'm like, do you have a community like a game community? Or do you just kind of have some people that buy your product?
Like some people that like it, or that
there's people that think you're cool. Oh yeah. Exactly. Or want coupons or whatever. So video games are deep.
It's not the same. And in Star Wars, I would have conversations with, I'd be at the agency doing the video games, and we'd go talk and pitch. We would say, hey, there's this new show. We think it'd be really worthwhile to do what we just did with Gran Torino, to do what I just did with Street Fighter. We would really love to do something. I worked on Myst, and that was one of the most amazing campaigns I've ever worked on in my life. And we would love to do this. We went and talked about doing that with a couple of shows, and they just didn't get it. And we would bring up Star Wars, and they would say, yeah, but Lucasfilm really isn't doing anything. It's very insular. That was the word I kept hearing. That's not really the mainstream. You're not going to be able to sell it. X-Files, to a large degree, is responsible for pulling. There were huge Usenet groups that were millions, hundreds of thousands and millions of people online talking in AOL chat rooms, Usenet groups, very early on. Chris Carter was in a Usenet group that I was part of very early. So these were people, Vince Gilligan came on later. They were engaged with their fandom in a way that now we expect, which is
that you have to have. It is, it is table stakes now. That's exactly the creators and everybody involved is in there having conversations and talking and tweeting.
We should talk about that, because there's a consequence and an impact to that. Just like anything else that we ask people to do, it used to be going on the PR, the stump, what we used to call the stump, right? That you have a movie or you have a TV show or whatever it is, or an author with your book. And for many of the actors or authors, they are introverts, or especially authors. And it was not something they wanted to do. Well, now we've got the same thing. And we do need to keep being aware of mental health. You can't force people who are not comfortable with the limelight, even for one time. So X-Files really pulled everybody in. It pulled fans in, it pulled the writer's room in, the directors, the actors. Well, Jillian didn't, but other actors were in on it. So that started Fox paying attention, at least certain aspects. And as soon as that happened, it took a couple of years, but it started the rotation of, in an early conversation for production, how are you going to connect with the fans? Should we tap into fans of this? So when marketing research came back in the room, and audience development from research, is when they started making that connection. So I'd be in a room talking about Buffy, and they would say, oh, so are you in connection with the fandom? I say, sure, I'm out at the events. This is what I'm doing. Is there a way, I love every time, is there a way for us to connect with them? And, of course, then it was called on the internet. So that was some of those early conversations that I would say there were maybe 100 people in the United States working really hard to convince IP owners this is an important new technology that you need to pay attention to. Video games were the first, obviously. They were all in. But TV shows were next. And honestly, then books, Harry Potter, and then movies. Movies were there, but they treated the IP studios treated movies, it was like a checkbox on your marketing list instead of a holistic campaign or strategy from production. TV allowed me to come on set. Stargate, I was on set from 2002 onward till they weren't on the air. Buffy, I got the end of Buffy. And then when we rolled over to Dark Horse Comics, I got to be there with the writers and do a whole bunch with Dark Horse Comics. So it's all about that holistic approach with fans, not just that little window of campaign that unfortunately some studios still do. We're just going to do a 6-week campaign.
It is crazy how our worlds are so. You're more on the entertainment. I see more on the brand side of things, and I say the same things. I say the same things to brands as I'm saying. We have to think. It has to be a constant. It's always on, and and if you really want to do it, you got to have the resources. We can't just put together that media plan. Put it out there, and then when it's done, how was opening weekend, or how did the sales, push up?
And then they drop like a rock 2 weeks later. They just want the analytics.
And they always will. And it'll always will. And it still happens today.
God. I had a conversation, and a couple of my friends have heard this ad nauseum because I was so gobsmacked with this conversation. So post a particular huge online during COVID fandom event, I was talking with a friend who worked with that franchise, and I work mostly with franchises now, again, because you want to develop that relationship, and in fandom development, especially, that's where it's the most important. So that was part of my progression at Fox, working with a bunch of franchises. And so talking to this friend of mine who's a digital franchise leader for this particular property, I was really excited. I said, God, that was a great event. I'm so excited for you guys, because we had just done one. A friend of mine had just done one as well. And we had gotten amazing, it was something like 10 to 50,000 people had attended our virtual event. But these guys had, in the millions. And I was like, this is amazing. This is great. I'm so excited for you. So what are you going to do to follow up? And he looked at me blankly and he's like, well, of course we're going to be in production, and we're going to move forward as soon as COVID's over. And I'm like, no. What are you going to do with all those fans you just got? And he goes, well, we've always had those fans. They just came online. I said, maybe, but you probably got a good chunk of that millions of people that are divvied up into different types. You've got your casual to your avid and fan, and you need to segment those. And he goes, oh yeah. Our research guys are going to do that. And I said, no, that's not what I mean. What are you going to do to continue to sustain, to maintain that fandom? And he starts laughing and he said, oh, Jenny, I'm sorry, but we have a really popular franchise. If we build it, they will come. Ha, ha, ha.
Yep. And they'll maintain themselves. They'll just do it. They'll just do it like they just magically will do it themselves.
And look, for that particular franchise, that's probably true. They could literally do the crappiest thing and everybody's going to go check it out, and it makes enough money just with that one time. But I mean, literally, it created like a hole in my chest. It's a franchise I love. And I was thinking, all these fans that I talk to all the time are going to be completely ignored, because what the thinking on the studio side is, we're going to shove content on them and they'll be happy. And we're going to decide what that content is that they get, and they'll be happy. And I was flabbergasted that this was still a conversation. And this was just at the end of COVID. So what, a year and a half ago?
Still going on.
still going on. And on the one hand, I love it because that means I still have a job. I'm out there convincing people, hey, you really got to do this.
Right.
And this is something I really do want to talk about with you. Maybe not on this podcast, but the new technology, quote unquote, new technologies that are entering the fandom side of things are the Wild West as far as I'm concerned. I'm excited about where this is going. We had this kind of weird frozen in time moment between 2019 and last year. And if you think about it, CES in, the Computer Electronics Show in Vegas.
That's right.
In 2019, they were talking about streaming and it was the hot topic. So this was January of 2019, or it could have been January 2020. I don't remember. And there was a huge panel, and I was watching it virtually, a huge panel of Comcast, Spectrum, Verizon, the studios, Warner Brothers was there. And somebody got up and said, where do you think the direction of streaming is going to be when you have all these different content people versus cable, which was still a thing, right? And I wish I could remember to give her credit. A woman on the panel stood up and she said, look, I think this is the most important question. I think they're going to be aggregators like you see in cable. And I think streaming is going to be it. And I think we need to absolutely go back to content is king. It's not about the medium, it's about the content. And literally, she got laughed at by the panel. And 3 years later at CES, that was the big conversation. What's the content? People at Amazon Prime already aggregates streamers. Disney has aggregated its properties. So it's not about the streamer, it's about YouTube, it's about Twitch, it's about where are the content creators? That's what's important. And for a fandom developer, that means I have a whole new world in the past 4 years that I get to focus on. I have the coolest group of people who are not just fans, but they are content creators. That's amazing for me. That means I have this incredibly cool network where I go to an IP studio and I say, hey, I've got a ready-made audience for you. And they will make content. You have to pay them, but they are ready to make content and they're fans of your IP. That's so cool for me. So I think
better?
This time is amazing.
What's better? It's probably it is a loaded question. Who am I kidding? What's better? Whenever Netflix first came out with the idea of like the all-in-one, I'm going to release a season.
Oh yeah.
I'm just going to give you a season. Such a novel and at the time super cool idea that I loved. It was like the idea of binge watching, right?
Yep.
So we've seen that kind of start to sway. And I always saw, as a pop marketer and a lover of pop culture myself, I was like, oh, look at what you're giving up on. Like all the tension of every episode every week, whenever all the YouTube video comes out and like what's happening, what are the Easter eggs? You are giving up so much to just get this 1 week.
Yep.
One big week of Stranger Things being talked about, and then poof, you're just kind of out of it. Instead
as a marketer, I'm never going to be in favor of it ever, because it's, to your point, it loses any anticipation, and marketers live for anticipation. That is what we bank on, frankly, especially when I'm doing fandom development with content. If you're releasing everything at once, I've lost the ability to release content weekly or work with those content creators that are fans to do something over time, because they obviously, if I've got 10 content creators, I can't use them all. If everything's dropped at once, I'm not going to cram my content campaign or production with 10 pieces of content at once. It's spreading it too thin, which means I don't get to work with as many content creators. There's a domino effect to this that I think loses money in the long run. So it's all about the bottom line. And so what I usually talk with a lot of my clients about is, I know that I'm not going to influence your distribution decisions, but if we're in early and you have me strategically in early, what we do need to do is assess, is this content that is better off all at once or over time? And it isn't just about the content, it's when are you releasing it? If you're releasing it in the summer, do it all at once. Nobody is sitting at home waiting for the next episode, unless it's something like Game of Thrones or Succession, people are not sitting there on the edge of their seat for this. We're out, we're doing things. Everybody, you're crazy with the kids at home. So that's part of it. There's a couple of variables that are into it. The marketers are always, in every meeting I've ever been in, are never going to be for a dump for that. Fans love a binge because it's the same as, getting 2 books at once in your favorite book series, or Saga by Brian K. Vaughan. 2 of the last volumes came at one time. You're like, oh my God, this is amazing. We love it. But as a content creator, as a strategist, as a consultant, as a marketer, I'm always going to be for, no, we need the anticipation.
Let's talk about building blocks of fandom. Because you've seen it from digitally from its beginning to where we are now. And it's,
right.
I don't even know where to be. It's such a conversation of that movement, but I know there are some things that are fundamentally the same, and you've seen them and thought about them. So let's talk about first what has not changed. What are those things that are the go-tos that is like a fan is always going to be, this is always what we go to?
So a fan is always going to want to know, if it's a TV series or a film, they're going to want to know about the character, the world building, and the actors behind it. That has never changed. What's the story? Who are the characters? What's the world about? And the actors that are behind it. What's changed in that, and Stargate was one of the ones, and X-Files especially, that led this charge digitally, is engaging fans to be interested behind the curtain in the production process. That's what's radically changed. And a lot of that started with DVD featurettes. So you had, obviously, audio and DVD featurettes that really, and they're the unsung heroes. Let me tell you, at studios, people don't even know about these departments. Every single division in studio in the world or production company has a DVD still special featurette production department. And that department works overtime to get, and now it would be considered digital because you have it attached to your digital streaming, it's the making ofs. It's the interviews behind the scenes. It's
the director, sound, like the commentaries. Oh God. I mean, they are the bread and butter of like
their asses off, and they get access like nobody's business. And I cannot take credit that I was smart about this. I was just curious. I happened to be in the Fox offices around the corner from, at the time, the DVD production people. And one of the guys there was as big a geek as I was. And I walked past his office, and his office was just chock-a-block with geek stuff. So I started a conversation when I started there. And we talked about what he did. And I'm thinking, well, why aren't we getting your content? As digital content and digital marketers, why aren't we getting your content early? And these guys were the first of pulling that curtain back and saying, hey, this is interesting to fans. And that was a slow build. It didn't happen at once. You'd have it was always the hardcore fans is how it would be described. But what ended up essentially turning into a huge audience, where those featurettes were almost as important as the series itself on the DVDs or the film itself, is that started to lend itself, as we used it online, it started to build a fandom that not just accepted, wanted, but now demands that kind of behind the scenes. And it goes back to what we talked about, writers, directors, actors being online and engaging with fans like that has never happened before. They have always been behind a protected wall. There were PR stumps and campaigns, interviews on TV shows, but the exposure to fans happened at very limited con experiences. So that's what's radically changed. What's never going to change, what's always going to be the same, is fans are rabid for more content. So supplemental stories, the characters, what's their backstory? That's never changed.
I tell brands this all the time too, because I'm always like, hey, it is anticipation. The anticipation is the fuel, right? Like that is it. Curiosity is the fuel, right? Like, who's going to direct? What's it going to do? And you watch.
Like, I'm talking about the casting for Superman Legacy right now on a regular basis. Like, well, is it going to be Nicholas Hoult? Oh my God, I hope it's not Nicholas Hoult.
And then it's just so much content around something that doesn't even exist yet. I know. Like there's a masterclass in just that in building the pre, right? Because now no longer is it just about the short thing of when the either episodes or the movie comes out. That's nothing. It is the building the anticipation beforehand. And the when it comes to movies, it's like that trailer, that first trailer or the sneak peek. It's everything.
And that's that's another division to department. Like Amazon has its own trailer AV department, and that department is responsible for building that anticipation. Every single studio has their own internal, or they have agencies that do. That's all they do. It used to be key art posters and trailers, and now it's digital key art, digital character cards, whatever it is that we're doing. And then it's that teaser, and then it's the trailer, and then it's the second teaser and the second trailer. The Flash just released, I think, its third trailer. I don't think that was necessary, but everybody still loved it. But that's that conversation internally at Warner Brothers. Is it giving too much away? But what they realized, and I think it was smart in this case, is that there's so much controversy surrounding, unfortunately, Ezra Miller, but also surrounding the DC universe, certainly their cinematic universe, that they're kind of hanging their hat on Flash. And what they wanted to show was, hey, if you're on the fence about this, here's 3 trailers that really give you the best of. That's the conversation that happens every day in a studio. And the process is fascinating. And it's different depending upon what's the medium and where are the fans. So this as a marketer. I don't care if you're a brand marketer, if you're a car, if you're a movie, a television series, an author, where's your audience? That's the first question everybody asks. Where does your audience live? Where are they online? Where are they in person? The biggest short-sightedness that I see is if I have a conversation with someone and they presume that I'm only doing digital. Well, no, fandom covers quite a broad spectrum. And there's a pie that you divvy up between social and, YouTube and Twitch and Discord don't really count as social. Those are different communities. So you have social, you have communities, you've got PR, you have paid media, you've got events, you have talent.
Cons, yes,
So there's a lot. And what you have to ask is, okay, if it's a new property, where is the fandom I want to reach? If it's an existing franchise, where is my fandom living? Where are they discussing? Where are they passionate? What are they doing? Once you do that and you ask that question, you need to not be short-sighted about what's that next concentric circle out of audience that you want to reach. And again, that goes back to the conversation I had with my friend where he said, if I build it, they will come. Well, sure. But if they don't like it, you've just lost somebody. So how do you sustain that relationship? And then what you have to look at is, of the content that you're creating, are you bringing on somebody like myself or somebody else who is holistically building content for your fans from the very beginning? James Gunn gets that probably better than anybody. I know there are people who just wish he wouldn't be on Twitter, but the fact is he gets it. And he gets that the most amount of transparency that he can do is so important. You know what? That's another thing that's changed. That transparency, fans demand it. Now, I don't think... Yeah,
it used to be that there was zero. There was just no look behind the curtain, and we didn't expect it. And and if I ever got any of it, it was like, that was just an extra special. But now it is a demand, and you got to be ready to be able to do that. And I will ask that
and
this
there's
too from
resistance
you.
to that. I got to tell you, a lot of resistance to that.
Where is the line then? And we could have a whole episode on what people call toxic fandom and everything else. But where is the line? Where is the line of such a cool idea? to say that fans now have a part to play in the creation of the thing that they love. And now there is this back and forth, right?
Yeah.
But there's also, and you, I know you're laughing because you hear this all the time, and it's just, it has to be this line of saying creative freedom. Because if I just gave you a fan what you wanted, if I just gave you a fan service, you're not going to get what I'm not going to bring new people in. It's not really what you want. It's what you think you want. But who does that the best right now?
And Dave Filoni does it the best. And here's why. And I've talked about this a bit. And I think there are others that do it very well. So if we're looking, it depends on the medium. Obviously. So if we're talking about a TV series, or not TV, if we're talking about a series, regardless of where it is, film, book, authors and books, I think is a separate issue. So we can talk about that separately, but I'm working on 2 sci-fi fantasy properties right now that are books first. And of course, immediately you want to go transmedia, but I think that's a different beast. It really is. I'm learning that's a radically different beast. Dave Filoni does it best. And there's a couple of reasons why. A, he's a fan. He knows as a producer, a director, a writer, he is a showrunner. He's done each of those jobs. He's worn each of those hats. But first and foremost, he's a fan. So he understands probably better than most. Jon Favreau is another, but Jon Favreau is a little bit more old school producer. So, and director. Dave Filoni knows he's not the one to be online. He's not the one to be on StarWars.com or the Twitter, but he knows there has to be content that he can give to them that gets to the fans, that helps them. And then he knows there are certain threads that he can pull through his shows that is in fan service, but not a, beholden to fan service. So perfect example is he has Zeb from Star Wars Rebels in Mandalorian, in one of the, I think it was the penultimate, the second to last episode. Used correctly in the story, gorgeously created, in personality and character, moves the connection to Ahsoka just slightly in the background. Perfectly done. Fans lost their minds. I was on a couple of the Star Wars threads. People were just, oh my God, did you see it? Super simple, not a big deal, but it was in fan service without making the story beholden to fan service. So that's the thing.
And for somebody that did not understand any of what you just said, right? Like any of the background of that, and didn't watch any of that, and didn't know what that character, and just all that as a scene where they were at a bar, and the nerdy thing is, he probably was at that place in time during that timeline. Like and it was like really well,
you know, and so he does it. Chris Carter actually did a good job of it super early on. As much as it's extremely hard for me to even say the name now, but Joss Whedon was brilliant at it. I think when he stumbled, he would be transparent about the fact, hey, I regret now that Buffy's Spike particular storyline was not appropriate, but this was what I was trying to show. And he was very transparent about it. So, you know, just recently I was over at MGM for 4 years working on Stargate and, you know, hopefully new shows and the whole bit. That was a tough walking of the line because we wanted to have the people who were the creators be online, and they were doing interviews, and it was great. But we constantly had the studio pulling us back. That's okay. That's their job. It's my job to push the rails as much as I can. I think the problem is when you have people who don't understand that there are some super simple messages that you can give to the fans that is at no risk for the studio. And that's where you have the gaps. Dave Filoni's got enough responsibility and power internally now, but he built that up, and you need to do that. And what I realized was I didn't have trust built up enough when I was having some of these arguments, because I do push the envelope. Because as a consultant, I'm not there in service to the studio. Yep. So I've got to do a good job of building trust with that studio while building trust with the fandom. And it's a tightrope that you walk. And I've
balancing act.
Yeah.
And I think that's it is only going to be more and more as we continue. So you'll never run out. We'll never run out.
I'm excited. I just described my job to somebody the other day who is in med tech. They no idea, but they're a geek. And I got excited describing my job to somebody. And that's the very, very lucky, blessed position that I'm in. And not everybody's going to get that. Not everybody gets that opportunity. And I don't take it for granted that, like I said, I have kind of the Wild West that's pretty open to me right now. I can pick and choose fandoms I want to work with. That's pretty amazing. And it's fun.
We're just at the beginning. We're just at the beginning of it too. Even though it feels like to a lot of us that have been around it, we're just just the beginning of what it can and will be. Because one word on Filoni, I just have to say, and I'm not dropping. I had the pleasure of all year last year working with Catherine Winder, who was the executive producer of Clone Wars, which was Clone Wars. And who actually brought in Filoni for his first first gig. And so I'm trying to get her on the show too. She's so just an amazing person. You want to talk about. She's in Canada now, has her own studio, doing her own thing, and doing a lot of
no, that's a trailblazer. Kids. I mean, as a woman, I'm a little.
She had to move her family to another country. I mean, you're talking. If you wanted to do animation at that time, they wanted to do digital animation at a series kind of thing. No. She was like, I just had a kid. Sorry, George. I'm not no. She's like, I told him no all the time.
She had ideas because I was up at Lucasfilm right when that was becoming a thing. So I only met her once in a meeting. It's one of those huge marketing
giant meetings, table.
Yep. I'm sitting not at the table, but in one of the chairs against the wall. Because again, digital marketing, you're kind of lowest on the totem pole sometimes. But those were some of the most amazing meetings to be literally a fly on the wall. It's like, oh, this was so cool. She was one of the few women. And I think there were maybe 2 women. So Bonnie Burton was one who was running Star Wars. Oh, you should interview Bonnie Burton. She was running StarWars.com. But I think it was me, Bonnie, Catherine, maybe one other, maybe 3 or 4. I was in awe of her. Absolutely in awe. I have followed her career. I am so jealous that you got to work with her. I just is a good person and a trailblazer for women in an industry, not just animation, but the entertainment industry. And then at Lucas, I mean, come on. She was bringing ideas to the table that nobody had talked about before, ever. And they listened to her because she knew how to build that trust. And that's what it comes down to.
A lot of it comes down to trust, right? And I have to ask you this before we have to go, because this could go on for hours. This could go on for hours, and I would love for it to go on for hours. But I have my daughter's art camp, art show. So I have to, check out what she's been up to, and I've been really lucky. Now you can't be pushy, but she has fallen into it naturally, which her mom is maybe not the happiest of, but anime. And so and she's jumping into the mangas and the animes, it is, we are having a fun, exploring fandom together. All kinds of different stuff.
It's so cool.
Times 10 to see how her age, to see it again and see where it's coming and how she sees things on YouTube.
Yep.
And how she finds stuff. It's it's like I'm learning. I get an opportunity to learn it all again, right?
Oh,
Like to go
absolutely.
to relearn. I didn't have any nerds around me, so like I grew up in the country, and
Oh,
like it was
got it.
it was a tough. The internet saved my life, so and got me to where I am. So I'm very fortunate. Um, we the question that I had for you before we go, one more we have to get to is if you're a brand.
Yeah.
Now we're in this time where not only is it this relationship with the fans and with the IPs, but who else? But it's money, and who else wants to come in? And I'm having the conversation with the brands, like with Guardians of the Galaxy 2, with Dairy Queen, worked with them to get it, like James Gunn, to get, what better place that would still be around 20 years later. Like there's an old Dairy Queen and a new Dairy Queen where, the seed was put, then a Dairy Queen. It worked within the storyline.
Which was perfect.
Which is perfect. But you do know there's old sponsorships of, I remember having Batman 2 toys, and that movie was not made for a 7-year-old to have toys on. But if you're a brand now, and you're when do you bring them? How would you tell them to come in if they're like, we have done research and found out that this fandom is just a place that we want to be? What's kind of like your rules of engagement, or what's the advice you give them first before they start to do anything? Like you're like, stop, don't just jump in, and it's not like a one shot. But what a brand is serious about, really beginning something or coming into a fandom? What's your advice?
So twofold. I love this question. I used to work with brands a lot, like we talked about. And when I was at Fox and MGM, obviously, very slowly, digital marketing started to loop in promotional partnerships. And one of the things that I talked even then is that, again, it goes back to the holistic. You need to go back to the beginning. Be there. If you see an IP that you're interested in, a franchise or a new anything, be there early. Make sure you do that research. So the first thing is, don't ever just jump in. I don't care if it's online or offline. Don't just jump in. All brand is doing really good research for where they are, where they're being talked about. Everybody does that. Every brand I've worked with. But are you actually spending the time to find out what your fandom is actually interested in besides talking about your brand?
Yes.
Funko is an easy one, right? They don't have to work hard at this. All they have to do is go out and look at the different fandoms and who wants a Funko Pop doll. For other brands, where Dairy Queen is a great one, but you did the research and looked at what makes sense for the setting of this content. So the second part of that is introduce yourself in a way that makes sense to that fandom, which again goes back to the first step, which is figure out who your fans are, where are they, why are they.
Take the time and do the research. Take the time and get to know them.
I hate to say that it's a resource heavy thing, but to be honest, if you're a big enough brand, you can do this. And quite frankly, where I found the easiest is look internally for people who are interested in that IP. If you're a big enough company, I guarantee you have someone in your marketing departments and your research and your interns who are fans of that IP that you want to reach out to. Talk to them. Then that second step of spending time with that fandom will be easier. And you have to be willing to do that online or offline. Brands obviously are promoting at events all the time, obviously. But a lot of times they're sponsoring an event. So I work with San Diego Comic-Con, LA Comic-Con. Brands are going to support those organizations, not necessarily a specific IP. So the third addendum to what I've just said is a lot of brands that I talk to, I tell them, find an IP that you're interested that's at this event and sponsor them. Offer to, don't say, can I hang a banner in your panel? Oh my God, enough. What you need to do is look for the connection with that IP in their content, in their fandom, and go and talk to them. Chances are, if you reach out to someone like me that's connected to them or to them directly, you'll find a bridge pretty fast to a fun solution, something fun you can do that isn't at a high cost that reaches that fandom. So again, each of those things that I just talked about, 1, 2, 3, it's doing the research, find somebody internally or in the fandom that you can connect to and spend that time. And then third, make sure that you look for a way to connect with this fandom offline or online that isn't just your standard, we'll sponsor, we'll promote. Can I put a banner on your, oh my God, like move past that.
Yeah. If it's on like the sponsorship sheet or whatever, like
right.
we're beyond, we're not talking sponsorship, we're talking a partnership. We're talking, sure. That's fine. That's great. But what are you going to do that only you and that fandom can do, or something? How are you going to progress that fandom forward?
That's right.
That's right. Such amazing advice for both brands and for fandoms to be able to, be comfortable in their conversations.
Yeah. They have to be, and that's what I have to advise them a lot, is that one of the best is Fandom Charities, which is the Buffy, the Browncoats Fandom Charities is the biggest Firefly Buffy. They do it right, because what they've known from the beginning, one of the people who runs it, she was in marketing. So she gets it. But you have to be open to those conversations. You have to be ready to have that conversation. Emma Loggins over at Fanbolt, she's another one. Oh my gosh, she started as an intern working on Everwood, I think. I mean, it's just, she worked her way up, so she gets it. But you have to find those people internally at those fandoms and those organizations, or just online, who are willing to talk to you and understand that you're not here to just sell. You're not here to just give money. And again, we get back to my job gets exciting right now because those people are content creators too.
That's right. And that's right. And then, if I hear one more brand just say like, I want to get into gaming, I'm like, oh my God. Like it's like saying,
and where have you been for
I watch movies. And it's always like, it's like the gamers,
and they want it easy. And look, the checklist, you and I both know there is traditional checklist that is easy. And I usually say right off the bat, and this is really important for people like yourself that are on the brand side, know ahead of time, what are you really willing to do? What kind of resources? I'm not talking about money, time. That's the commodity.
What can you commit, and how long can you commit to it?
And if you can only do the paid media, the promotional sponsorship, the banner, whatever it is, okay, cool. That's what you can do or are willing to do.
That's right. Listen, Jenny Stiven, you are like a treasure trove of knowledge, pop culture and marketing knowledge, and we got to do this again very soon. I'm so happy to have been able to have you on as a guest, and cannot wait for this episode to go out. Where can people find you? Because I'm sure they're going to be interested. Where can they find you? Where can they find you online? Where's like the easiest spot?
Question, right? All right. So for the most part, I'm on Twitter at Jenny Stiven. I'm on TikTok at Geek with Gray Hair. I'm going to be developing a new TikTok weekly show, where not a podcast, because like we talked about earlier, I'm just not disciplined enough for it. But I will be talking about what's happening that week from a pop marketing standpoint. So at Geek with Gray Hair is really the big one. If you're on the brand IP side, I'm on LinkedIn under Jenny Stiven.
Listen, it's been such an absolute pleasure. I hope you have a wonderful weekend, and I really hope to have you on again soon. So thank you. Thank you so much for being on. And again, that was another episode of the Pop Marketing Podcast, one of my favorites, and I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did. Jenny and I we'll be talking soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.